Okay, guys, so this next video is going to cover 3 slides, slide 7, 8, 9, and we're going to get into some stuff here. We're going to get into some conceptual stuff. So this video is going to be somewhat dense, meaning there's going to be kind of a lot of information packed in here, but I will try to speak more slowly than I normally would do otherwise, and try to really explain it in a way that you can access and make sense to you. So if you take a look at slide number 7, you will see there have been really sort of two theoretical models, two ways of thinking about what internet disorder is or might be. And one is psychopathological in nature and one is non-psychopathological. So the psychopathological approach says, look, we can really better conceptualize internet addiction as part of a different type of disorder, a larger umbrella disorder, another type of classification of disorder that already exists in the DSM, and this is a type of that, right? So if you think about, just to make this make sense to you, if you think about, for example, mood disorders are a category that exists. And then we have types of mood disorders like major depression, like bipolar disorder, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I mean by that. The non-psychopathological approach to understanding this is not really part of an existing disorder. It is sort of its own, not necessarily disorder, but it might be a sort of compensatory strategy. And by that we mean it's a way for people to deal with something in their lives, compensate for something in their lives that they cannot otherwise necessarily deal with, that they are using internet. Compulsive internet use is becoming a way to compensate for things they can't really deal with, like negative life situations or emotions that are difficult for them to handle. This could be indicative of some underlying disorder, but it's not clear which, and it might be its own disorder, right? So let's take a look at internet addiction as a psychopathological issue, meaning it's part of an already existing category of disorder. And in that way, there's been 3 existing disorder categories that have been considered. Here we're talking about obsessive compulsive disorder, which is already in the DSM, or is it an impulse control disorder, which is also in the DSM, or is it instead an addictive disorder, which is also in the DSM. And as you know from what I've said so far, internet addiction has been sort of the go-to term. So there's been this tendency for professionals who agree this should be something diagnosed, that it's more like an addiction than any other existing disorder. So let's talk a little bit about this. What do we mean here? So we're talking about, when it comes to OCD, OCD, as it presently exists in the DSM, if you've taken my Psych of Mental Illness class, you have a little bit of a leg up here. OCD involves very repetitive, intrusive, ruminative thoughts. And those thoughts cause a lot of anxiety, which then is uncomfortable. And the person needs to find a way to get rid of that anxiety. So these intrusive thoughts, for example, could be things like being contaminated by germs, thinking that one is going to be contaminated by germs, and they're constantly cycling through their consciousness this idea that they're going to get germs. That elevates their level of anxiety, and then it's like, what do I do to get rid of that anxiety because it's so uncomfortable, I can't function? That's where the compulsive part comes in. The obsessive part's the ruminative thought pattern. The compulsive thought is the compensatory activity that is done with the specific goal of removing the anxiety caused by the ruminative thought. And so in this case of the example I gave you, maybe somebody will compulsively wash their hands or shower, or things like that, to try to eradicate any germs they think they have come in contact with, to try to quell that anxiety. And so how do we apply this to internet use? In an internet environment, the compulsive aspects of OCD could be something like the constant obsessive thought about needing to be on the internet, needing to check email, needing to check Facebook, needing to see if someone liked what they posted, and they can't concentrate on anything else because needing to check the email, needing to check who liked their post is creating so much anxiety then they have to go compulsively get online and check, right? So this is, not a perfect analogy, but kind of like people with OCD who have the obsessive thought that they didn't turn the water off or lock their doors. And they have to keep going back and checking and rechecking and rechecking and rechecking to make sure they lock their doors or that they turned off the stove or turned off the lights. Okay? So the idea here is that if this is really a manifestation of OCD, that repetitive ruminative thought that one is missing something, there's probably an important email, or I wonder if people are noticing my posts, and if not, I'll feel really anxious, so I have to go check. And then they keep getting online and getting on email and checking and checking and checking and checking. There are some, not many, but there are some treatment studies wherein SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and you guys know what that means from prior classes, means it specifically increases the level of circulating serotonin at the synapses in the brain. Some of those treatment studies with SSRIs actually support to some extent that OCD might be actually what this internet use is a manifestation of, a form of OCD. Because giving SSRIs and increasing the circulating serotonin levels in the brain seem to decrease some of these excessive uses of the internet, much like it helps people with OCD to some extent. It's also been suggested by some professionals that internet overuse may be the consequence of sort of an obsessive passion, which some researchers have defined as, quote, a strong inclination towards a controlled internalization of an activity that a person likes, finds important, and in which both time and energy are invested into one's identity. Boy, is that a mouthful. The idea is that the individual really likes this activity, finds it important, invests a lot of time, because it becomes sort of a critical aspect of how they see themselves. You think of people talk about their online identity, and this internalization of the so-called online identity seems to be caused from sort of pressure from what they attach to that online activity, or the uncontrollable excitement they get from the activity. And so if you think about this, and kind of maybe people's online persona gets them a lot of likes and a lot of followers, and it makes them feel really good about themselves and drives up their self-esteem, whereas their real life persona is fraught with all kinds of doubt and insecurity. And so they become sort of compulsively involved in continuing to fuel that online persona to quell the anxiety of the inadequacy of their real life persona and their real sense of self. And so because that online presence becomes too important in the way they view themselves, it takes up disproportionate space, some researchers have said, in their own identity and sense of self, then they start to compulsively engage in the internet for that reason. Otherwise, they have to confront their real self, so to speak, and that brings a lot of anxiety. Now, impulse control disorders have also been considered as something that perhaps internet overuse should be conceptualized as. Here we're talking about disorders in which a person has an impaired ability to basically stop themselves or inhibit themselves from engaging in certain repetitive activities that can create really problematic life consequences. So you think about things like compulsive shopping, right? Where people are buying and 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 buying, and they can't stop themselves from buying. That could potentially be considered a form of impulse control disorder. We have people, you may have heard the term kleptomania, people who steal not because they need the item, because stealing fuels some sense of excitement and they have to keep doing it. Or people who set fires compulsively, because that again fuels some psychological need for risk-taking in some cases, and other forms that impulse control problem is indicative of something else. So in this type of disorder category, impulse control disorder, internet overuse has been described as impulsive, meaning the individuals who've been studied actually report increased tension or arousal before they connect to the internet. And then that tension or arousal is alleviated once they get online. Much like people who set fires and have this sense of arousal, and then they set the fire and that dissipates. Or people who steal get this sense of excitement and arousal, and then they steal the item, not because they need it, but it alleviates the arousal. Studies have, to some extent, supported this approach. Lack of perseverance. When you persevere, you continue to seek a goal. Lack of perseverance and urgency, which means you have a sense that you have to do this now, are positively related to internet overuse. And this seems to support this impulsivity idea that the person feels a sense of immediacy, like I have to do this now, I have to get online, I have to check email, I have to get on Instagram, I have to get on Facebook, and they're not really able to persevere a longer term goal. They just need to get this done now, and this arousal needs to be matched by getting on the internet. This classification, however, of internet overuse as a form of impulse control disorder has been viewed by many professionals as a bit too restrictive, because it seems to be the case with the research we have available that people who engage in internet overuse are not just exhibiting impulse control traits. There's a lot of other stuff that seems to be going on. Personality traits, for example, specific motivations for internet use that go far beyond an inability to control an impulse to alleviate arousal. They have comorbid psychopathology, so depression, anxiety, ADHD, other types of disorders. So this one of the three models of psychopathological inclusion is probably not very strongly supported in the literature we have to date. Finally, the addictive disorder category. This one conceptualizes internet overuse as a form of behavioral addiction, just like exercise addiction was considered a form of behavioral addiction. And in this model, folks really want to align it with substance and alcohol use disorders. Of the three, most of the literature on internet overuse seems to want to focus on seeing this as an addictive disorder, conceptualizing it as a form of addiction, behavioral addiction like gambling disorder in the DSM-5 has been included. The reason for this is that it appears to be the case from the research we have to date that people who engage in internet overuse have a variety of characteristics that are similar to folks with substance and alcohol addiction. For example, they have difficulty with conflicts and managing conflicts by confronting them and being problem focused. In doing so, they're less efficient in processing information. They have lower cognitive control, so they don't reflect easily and inhibit what they do on the basis of reflection of consequences and judgment. They have what we call impaired executive control and enhanced reward sensitivity. And you know this. So I don't have to belabor the point. You know this from our discussion of substance and alcohol use, that the research shows the prefrontal cortex, the stop system, with advanced use of substances and alcohol seems to lower its ability. And the go system, that limbic system where the ventral tegmental area and nucleus accumbens and amygdala are, seems to be activated more strongly by substances. And the argument is there are some studies to suggest similarities as well with internet overuse, that same go system gets activated and drives behavior, and the whoa stop system that reflects and has good judgment and is rational and thinks about how this overuse might be impacting other life activities is not really functioning as highly. And so the idea is that when we look at people with internet overuse, there seem to be biopsychosocial model, health psychology, biopsychosocial factors that align it with what people who have substance and alcohol use disorders do. Now, I'm going to caution you there, though, because the data is slim. And there have been some methodological problems with the data, especially the biological data on brain areas involved in internet overuse and how that is similar to or different than changes in the brain that we have much more data on for substance and alcohol use. Now, I was going to use this video to cover multiple slides. In fact, realizing that I've given you a lot of information here, I'm going to cut it here. And I'm going to go to a new video for the same slide for the non-psychopathological model. I want to break this down because I don't want to inundate you with too much information. This was conceptually dense, a lot to think about. So I want you to let it percolate, 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 and then move on to the next slide.